I just want to start the stream off by saying subscribe to this motherfucker right here. He's the GOAT. Makes content all the time. Never mind. Makes content sometimes. Just watch it, bro. You'll get more insight than you'll get out of my stream. So, yeah. Anyway, we're watching Who is Dahmer Even Made For by Meep Top. Skeet.
It feels like at least once a year, a streaming show will appear seemingly from nowhere and become a phenomenon over.
That's facts. Especially like Squid Game, bro. That shit popped out of nowhere overnight.
This year, that show was Dahmer, and honestly, even having seen it, that still kind of baffles me. I guess the writing should have been on the wall given the ever-increasing popularity of true crime over the last decade, but really, who could have guessed that one of the most popular shows, not just of this year, but of all time on Netflix, would have been a show about Jeffrey Dahmer? What?
Bro, honestly though, who would have thought? Can you fucking work with me, Mike? There we go.
Well, Ryan Murphy, that's who. That's right. Let's just address the elephant in the room.
Ryan Murphy.
This show is spearheaded by Ryan Murphy and Ian Brennan, the co-creators
No way.
of Glee. Ryan Murphy also being one of the co-creators of American Horror Story. The show,
For real, that explains why they brought him back. He already had connections.
Basically the only thing this channel is known for at this point. That being said, it has been over a decade since American Horror Story released, and I'd hate to define someone's creative output solely by what they made 10 years ago. All of my negative
Honestly,
feelings toward AHS aside, I really
like the shit I made 10 years ago, garbage.
wanted to give Dahmer a fair chance and go in with an open mind. The names attached did have me somewhat hesitant, but after the overwhelming success of the
Can't
show,
judge a
plus
creator
the
by his
divisive
art.
critical reception, I really felt like I had to see what the show was all about. Does Dahmer deserve its success? And did the creative voices behind the show grow at all in the past?
Evan Peters is not that tall. I'll be damned, he is that tall. But they got him on a stool or something. That says he's 6'1".
Last decade. Well,
is that accurate? Why would they make him 6'1" when he's 6 foot?
Yes and no.
Okay, what'd you like about it?
I have to admit, watching this right after rewatching American Horror Story Asylum was like a breath of fresh air. Apart
Bro,
from
honestly.
a few key scenes, this series was surprisingly restrained. The show is not as fixated on shock value as I expected going in, at least not when it comes to the portrayals of the more grisly stuff that occurred. Really, for a show about Jeffrey Dahmer, it's shockingly light on gore and on-screen violence. The horrifying acts that occur are
They
more
probably
often
weren't allowed to
live
show
than
that,
shown, and I think those
especially
scenes are
since they
more
were
effective
based on
because of it.
real
I really enjoyed
actions.
how methodically paced and tonally consistent this series was compared to the usual baroque and gratuitous style that Ryan Murphy employs in work he's involved in. All without losing a lot of the things I did enjoy about his previous work, like the cinematography, great performances, not just from Evan Peters, from literally everyone, and also the transgressiveness of the material and its socio-political commentary. I think the more subdued approach shows that, on some level, everyone involved had some semblance of respect for the events that took place, and were at least mindful about how to portray them in terms of gratuity. Overall, I would say this is probably the best work I've ever seen from this creative team. And now comes the part that's probably going to make people mad at me. So before I say anything, just know that 1, there will be spoilers for Dahmer, if you can even call them that.
Nah.
Plus, I'm going to give a very fair content warning. We're going to be talking lightly about some very heavy subject matter, so look on screen. If any of the following topics put you at risk of harm, please click away from the video now. And lastly, this is just my perspective on things. I'm not trying to speak for anyone else or come to anyone's defense or attack anybody. I'm not trying to give a definitive take on the show. I'm just sharing my own personal feelings on it. And unfortunately, I feel this series also embodies the worst aspect of American Horror Story, and that's being exploitative. If there was one thing in AHS I was most negatively critical of, that was the show constantly using one-to-one recreations of real-world violence right alongside horror tropes to scare and entertain its audience. And while I think it'd be a gross oversimplification to say that's exactly what Dahmer does, it still feels that way a lot of the time, just with a slightly different execution. Being a true crime show, the entirety of the show is predicated on adopting filmmaking techniques from character studies, dramas, and horror films to tell a real-world story. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing inherently incorrect with this in my eyes. It's not as blunt and tasteless to me as putting spooky monsters and the horrors of World War II side by side.
Bro, facts. How are they gonna be able to put how you gonna put World War II shit next to horror? Like, come on, bro.
As exactly the same thing, but it does present interesting creative and ethical challenges. A lot of times in great fictional stories, what happens is the story itself displays a tiny aspect of reality, and through the lens of fiction, makes it feel larger and pulls it more clearly into focus, refracting reality back to us in a way that makes it feel more truly understood. What Dahmer and other reality-based entertainment attempts to do is take big picture reality and inversely uses fiction to try and compress that reality into its narrow lens. In both cases, you're left with similar results. Both are distortions of reality. The difference is in their approach, where one feels enhancing and the other feels inherently reductive. I feel like the goal that's trying to be reached in this reductive approach is to tell the story in a way that can be intuitively and emotionally understood by the audience without reducing it down to the point where it excludes important details or doesn't feel like it's truly telling the full story, even though it never really could. Dahmer as a show really struggles with this balance, and it's clearly something that was weighing on everyone's minds behind the scenes.
I wanted to make sure that we, as viewers, got to truly sort of understand how a situation like this takes place, not just through Jeffrey Dahmer's eyes, but through the eyes of people who had their own hopes and aspirations and dreams.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown to tell this story. That comes with a lot of responsibility because you want to make sure you get it right.
It felt important to be respectful to the victims, to try to tell the story as authentically as we could. We had one rule going into this from Ryan, that it would never be told from Dahmer's point of view.
To be fair to everyone creatively involved, I don't envy them. That is a hard line to ride, and everyone is bound to walk away with wildly different interpretations. For me, they made a few missteps that soured the entire experience for me. I feel like if Ryan Murphy's one rule for the show was truly what Evan Peters says it was, then they didn't do a very good job sticking to it in the first half. Now, this isn't always the case, but as audience members, we are sort of trained to rely on a central character to be our perspective throughout a show or movie, and what character becomes centric to the story is really important in works like Dahmer. This is something that David Fincher's true crime projects like Zodiac and Mindhunter have always been great at. The Zodiac killer is not the central character of Zodiac. The film is centered around an ensemble of journalists at the San Francisco Chronicle. Mindhunter isn't a show centered around Ed Kemper or Charles Manson. It is a story involving them told through the perspective of an ensemble of FBI agents. And when it comes to writing your central character, at least in fiction, a piece of advice you'll always hear is make your most interesting character your central character. The writers of Zodiac and Mindhunter found clear ways to make their respective central characters compelling, mostly because they're very well defined and nuanced, but also due to the fact that what drives these characters is the same thing that compelled us to watch them. The characters, like us, have that natural curiosity a lot of us seem to have about trying to understand these